Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Teachers Talk podcast. My name is Alex, and my professional counterparts know me as Jeff, so that's what I'm going to be going by in these podcasts. And today I'm joined by my colleagues and good friends, Jess and Adam. Jess goes to Nipissing University, and Adam goes to Western. So we're going to be talking about our experiences in our first year of Teachers College. So welcome onto the channel, guys. If you could both introduce yourselves and your YouTube channels, I'd very much appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today and to get to talk to you guys about Teachers College. I am currently at Nipissing University, as Jeff said. I'm in the primary junior stream, so I don't have any teachables. And I eventually want to do either teaching special education, the gifted program, something kind of in that realm. So I might touch on that again later. And I went to University of Waterloo for my undergrad, and my major was kinesiology, and then I did a minor in psychology. So yeah, that is a bit about me. My teacher YouTube channel, where I've documented a lot of my teacher journey, including the application process, is Jess Avenue. And I also have a teacher Instagram at Teaching with Miss Jess. So if you ever want to follow me or reach out to me there, those are my socials. So yeah, I'm excited to be here today.
All right, yep. And as Jeff said, I'm going to Western, and I'm in the intermediate senior stream. So my teachables are math and general science. My undergraduate degree is a degree in kinesiology, also from Waterloo. My YouTube channel is still pretty fresh, still pretty new, but it's called Beneath the Surface. And I was hoping to tailor it towards people who aren't quite sure what they want to do with their life, and I wanted to tell just stories that led me to where I am now and lessons that I've learned in my life, and trying to help people make their decisions and be like a little bit more informed.
Yeah, wonderful. And then, as you guys know who are watching, I'm Alex. I go to York University and I'm in the IS division, so intermediate senior, with teachables in senior biology and chemistry. My previous degrees, a bachelor in science with my subdisciplines being biochemistry and biotechnology, and then a master's in science with my subdisciplines being chemistry, biochemistry, and biophysics. So with that said, I guess let's get into our first question. Thank you for introducing yourself. And our first question today will be, why did you decide to go to Teachers College, and sort of what was the catalyst that made you decide on applying?
All right, so when I started my undergrad, I actually started in a different program. I had no idea what I wanted to do. I just liked kin better, so I was like, okay, I'll switch into kin. And when I got there, I realized that I liked science, I liked learning about kinesiology, but I didn't know if that was the field where I wanted to find my career in. So I kind of made these pillars of what I want my dream career to have. So I wanted to have my own space. I wanted to work with the same population over an extended period of time. And I wanted to work with people with intellectual or physical disabilities. And so through that process, I kind of realized that teaching very much encompassed all of the things that I wanted out of a career. So basically in my second last year of my undergrad, I was kind of like, teaching basically fits everything I want to do. I think I would really enjoy teaching. I love working with kids. So that was kind of the decision process for me. It wasn't like I was born and I knew I wanted to be a teacher, but I kind of grew into it and realized that it fit everything that I wanted. So that was my decision process. And in terms of deciding which schools, I wanted to choose schools that had a relatively easy admission process and application process. So I didn't look too deeply into the specifics of each program, because for primary junior, you don't need teachables, like I said earlier, so all programs are pretty similar. But yeah, I ended up choosing Nipissing. I have a pretty in-detail video on my YouTube channel if you want to check that out in terms of my application process to the three schools. But yeah, that was my journey to realizing I wanted to go into teaching, and now I'm at Nipissing University.
Awesome. Yeah, I was similar. I didn't really know what I wanted to do, but I took a few co-ops through University of Waterloo, and I learned that I like the social aspect of a job. Like some jobs you can work and there's not really a whole lot of social interaction, and not necessarily a whole lot of variety throughout the day. So that was one aspect that went into me deciding teaching. And then another one was I just kind of have some problems with the way that education is and things that I want to sort of contribute to changing, I think. Like when I was a student, I didn't really think that sort of the format of sitting down and just sort of taking in all the content that the teacher throws at you was the ideal way of learning. So I just wanted to contribute to changing that, and um, I like having something that forces me to be on my feet throughout the day. So that was sort of what contributed to me deciding to go.
Yeah, and I think for me, I'm also similar to the two of you in the sense that I wasn't quite sure exactly what I wanted to do. At the time that I was applying to Teachers College, I had many different options available. I was looking into med school options, MD, PhD options. I was looking into work in a couple of different areas of either the government or residence life, etc. Um, but I sort of sat down and I looked at my life and I looked at what I wanted to do, and I figure I love working with people. I'm very good at mentoring people and sort of sitting down and making myself approachable and talking. I think I talk a little bit too much sometimes, as you two can probably vouch for. But essentially, what it came down to was I started covering some lecture duties at Waterloo while one of the professors got sick, and then the catalyst for applying to Teachers College was actually this man right below me here, Adam. I remember the two of us were sitting in his car after an intramural game. I believe it was an intramural game. And we were just sort of chatting about what we wanted to do. And it was December 1st, and the application deadline was December 3rd to get the OUAC application in. And I remember you just sort of were like, hey man, like, you're great at what you do and you love talking to people and you should seriously consider just applying this year. And you know, and I was very hesitant. I was sort of like, yeah, but the application's 2 days away, how am I going to get everything in? And you're like, well, I already applied, and it took me what, an hour, 2 hours to get sort of the application document in, and then each university has different deadlines for the supplemental things. So I was like, oh, so in other words, I have another couple weeks to apply. And that's sort of how I applied to Teachers College. Got my stuff in that night or later that day and sort of went from there. But yeah, and I think this brings me into my next question of what was your sort of impression of your first year and what were your experiences like? Was it exactly what you expected or were there some differences?
I think through the lens of being in school during a pandemic, um, it almost exceeded my expectations. I think a lot of profs, at least in my experience at Nipissing, when they're the professors of a teacher's college, they're way more focused on preparing you for a career, whereas an undergrad, they might not be that way. They might necessarily just kind of be focused on delivering the content, whereas in teacher's college, they're more focused on preparing you to be a teacher. So the content is way more applicable, way more applied. So I really enjoyed it. I had a pretty broad overview of my courses. Like I did a bit of everything in my first year. And I enjoyed it. My profs really tried to make online as enjoyable as possible. And I still found a lot of opportunities to get to know people from my program and people from my year. So overall, not too bad. I was kind of nervous to do online school. It just wasn't really for me in the past, but I think having the past year to adjust to it and the profs really trying to tailor it and to make it very digestible for the students, it was good. And I did get to complete 2 in-person placements, which was pretty rare this year. So I was super grateful for those. But overall, I enjoyed my first year. I'm excited for second year. It's way more hands-on. I do get a couple electives. So yeah, that was my first year and kind of looking ahead to second year.
That's quite good, actually. We got just the one placement, and our second one got canceled. But yeah, I was pleasantly surprised by the way that first year went for me as well. I think they did a pretty good job of transitioning to the online in such a short amount of time. It was a little bit of a challenge. Like some of the courses, I mean, just we had 10 courses all at once, and a lot of time I found I was spending just kind of sifting through the course website trying to find all the resources that I needed for this assignment and whatnot. But yeah, I went in with a lot of ideas, like I said earlier, about how I wanted teaching to change, and I was surprised to hear my professors or my teachers started talking about most of this stuff that I had thought, and I didn't really think this was already in the works. Like, so it was nice to hear some of that.
Yeah,
But yeah,
oh,
oh,
go
go
ahead.
ahead, go ahead.
No, no, go finish up.
Okay, okay. Yeah, I found that the teachers at Western are all they're all different, but they're all like very passionate about what they do, and they all have had some sort of accomplishment in the education field, which is nice. So we got like quite a diverse um, array of opinions as well.
Yeah, I think for me, I would say it's fairly similar. I very much enjoyed my first year experience in Teachers College, especially with it being online and just being so different from what everyone else had been talking about. And I think really at York, I think the program really benefited from being online because I think that it allowed us to put more time into our assignments and, work a little bit more with our groups without having to spend so much time commuting. I think in my case, like it would have been for a 3 hour class, like if there was a day that I had a 3 hour class, it'd be 3.5 to 4 hours of commuting. So I'd be commuting more than I was in class, which would definitely detract from my work and what I was learning and everything else. Um, I also would say that it wasn't, based on my high school experiences, and this is similar to you, Adam, uh, the things that they were teaching in Teachers College is very different from what I had experienced and things that I had wanted to change going into education. So I was pleasantly surprised that the education industry has changed so much since we were in high school with a couple of curriculum updates and just better teaching strategies in general. And I think York really benefits from that as a big part of their program is teaching for social justice. So, with that said, what were sort of the focuses of your programs at your universities?
Yeah, Nipissing is located in North Bay, for those of you who don't know. And there's a lot of strong, well, closely knit Native communities up there. So Nipissing does weave in a lot of Indigenous, Native, FNMI teaching practices, and they really place a focus on how to teach Native students, how to incorporate them into your classroom, how to make them feel welcome and seen within your classroom. So that was kind of a surprise as I grew up in the Hamilton area and there was never that big of a focus for me growing up, like being exposed to Native culture. So I think it was really cool to be able to learn about it in Teachers College and to have a lot of these experiences be able to be firsthand, like from like members from the reserve and whatnot. So there's a lot of that up at Nipissing if you're interested in Native culture. I would say Nipissing is a good school for that. So I was surprised to see that as the focus, but I'm also like very pleased to be learning about it because I never had much opportunities earlier in my life to be able to learn about that.
Cool. Um, yeah, we talked a little bit about the Indigenous education. I was actually very surprised learning about some of the history of it. Um, yeah, I don't know if Western necessarily had one focus for the whole program. I think there was definitely some recurring themes, but all the different courses were fairly different with some overlap, but fairly different. But yeah, there was some recurring themes like developing the 21st century competencies like problem solving, critical thinking, creativity, like skills with technology, stuff like that. And I guess if I was to take a stab at the overall focus, would probably be developing people as individuals as opposed to sort of just teaching the content.
Okay. Yeah, and that's actually interesting hearing both of you talk about that because my experience, not that it was different at York, but well, it was different at York. We did touch on Indigenous education, but it wasn't too big of a piece. We did have a course that was about the foundations of education, so it did talk about with, early on once the English started to colonize Canada and how that affected the education industry and sort of residential schools. We did have a somewhat part of a course about that. but we didn't go too much into it. I think for us at York University, with it being a school in the GTA and really focusing on intercity education and social justice, pretty much our entire first year, I want to say that I had 4 or 5 courses that were explicitly about inclusion, disability, urban education. So in other words, how to take your content and teach it to the students and have them complete assignments that are culturally relevant and responsive, which I think is, well, obviously it's needed in today's society. I think that as we get more diverse as a country and as our education system moves away from sort of the industrial form of education that it has been previously, that is always sort of been talking about content, where students need to learn all the same content and they sort of get standardized tests. And I think that as we move sort of into this 21st century learning, where you have more student choice in assignments, you have students help you create your lesson plans and what your course outlines look like, what assignments they want to do. I think that was a big focus of York, making sure that all of our teaching and all of the content that we're going to be discussing is culturally relevant and not teaching from a textbook or, letting students construct their own knowledge. But yeah, and I guess all three of us have sort of touched on this already, but was there anything about your respective programs that surprised you?
I would probably say kind of how broad the teachings are. I was expected to kind of be given literal like unit plans and day by day, like this is what you're going to do on the Monday of the unit, the Tuesday. Whereas they kind of say, here's the curriculum, look at it if you want. You can develop one lesson plan to practice, but here are general teaching tools, which looking at it now makes way more sense than teaching everyone like day by day how to teach, because all teachers obviously are going to have different teaching styles and strategies. But I was kind of surprised by that, but not in a bad way. So
Yeah, similar for me. I think there was less of a focus on the specific content that we're going to teach than I thought there would be, which I don't think was a bad thing. I do think that it helps to refresh your knowledge about the content before going into some of the stuff that we talked about in classes, just because if you don't remember it really well, then sometimes you'll be like in your head trying to remember, oh, what was that again, while the class is going on and stuff. So I do think it's good to have a little bit of a refresher of the old content. Like for me, the math was fine, but the general science, there's definitely stuff from grade 9, 10 science that I didn't completely remember. So I wish I had done maybe a little bit of a refresher. The courses were definitely more focused towards teaching techniques and also assessment techniques. I think that's one that maybe surprised me a little bit, is just how much we talk about assessment, like as opposed to the standard pencil paper test, more on sort of informally assessing students and giving them the chance to show what they know in a way that isn't your typical like written answer.
Yeah. And I'm actually going to echo pretty much the same sentiment as the two of you. I was sort of under the impression that going into teachers college, I was going to learn how to teach chemistry. I was going to learn, let's construct, a grade 12 university chemistry unit plan for all of the units, and let's go through the curriculum and learn what you're going to be teaching and sort of refresh yourself on the content. And I didn't get any of that. And I'm glad I didn't, because I think it is so much more important looking back now and reflecting on the year that we do have the opportunity to understand different pedagogies and different approaches to teaching, understand how to properly assess our students. And for me, that actually is why I'm going to be taking a course over the summer that my elective course is going to be educational assessment. So it's all about going through the Growing Success document, which for those of you who don't know, is an Ontario curriculum document that sort of discusses accommodations and assessments and equity within the classroom. So that's what my elective is going to be, which I think is going to be pretty exciting and pretty informative. I definitely think it's going to help my teaching a lot. And I'm hoping that I'll be able to use that in the practicums that I have next year. And sort of on that note, I know we've all sort of mentioned that we have practicums, but I really just want to give us all the opportunity to talk about our practicums and what we did, whether they were in the school or in the community. And yeah, the floor is yours.
Okay, so for Nipissing, initially we were supposed to be on placement the very first week of September when kids were returning to public school, but that was pushed back. And I did end up having a 4 week block in October of an in person placement in a kindergarten class. So I never initially saw myself teaching kindergarten, but it was very fun and I really did enjoy my time. And it was awesome getting to see the things that I learned in class kind of come to life and how they would actually be applied in a classroom. Although we did at that point, because we had only been in school for a month, we hadn't learned too much about kindergarten because usually within a course there's like 1 week of how to teach it to kindergarten. So I hadn't learned too much about how to actually teach kindergarten as it is very play-based. But it was fun and I did love it. And the way Nipissing is structured, you return to the same class in the winter term. So I did get to go back for 4 weeks again in person, which was super lucky, in the winter term. And that was way more, I had 50% teaching responsibility for the 4 weeks, which in kindergarten is basically all of the instructional time possible. Because you give about 2 hours of instruction a day in kindergarten. So I really did like actually getting to return to the same placement, and kind of getting to see how the kids grew over the 2 or 3 months that I was away from them, and having to get to build on the same relationships that I already started. So I think having 8 weeks within the same class was really valuable because you kind of get to see a bit more of how developing relationships over time work as opposed to some different schools' program structures and their placement structures. But yeah, overall, I really did enjoy my time on placement. I'm super lucky and super fortunate that I got 4 weeks in person. But yeah, that was a bit about my placement.
That's that's pretty great. I'm surprised you got two, and I'm surprised you spent like 50% of the time teaching. I think for I've had just the one, which happened in November to mid December, and it was supposed to be up to 20% of time spent teaching, and then the rest of the time spent observing. So I did spend a lot of time sort of just sitting at a desk watching my associate teacher teach a lecture, which I think looking back, I would have focused on things maybe just a little bit differently. I think I focused a lot on what the teacher was doing and a little less on how the students were responding to what the teacher was doing. And I think if I was for my next practicum, when I observe, I'll probably be trying to have a look at how the teachers respond, because no teacher is perfect. Like, no, just because your associate teacher is using a given strategy doesn't mean it necessarily is the best strategy to use. So I think it's good to assess for yourself how the students are responding to it. I was lucky that I was able to, so I taught 7-8 math, and I would teach the same lesson 3 times in the same day. So I was lucky enough to get to sort of revise what I was teaching, which was cool. So I would give the first lesson in the morning, and then my associate teacher could give me a couple tips, and then I could apply those, and I could think of my own sort of things that I needed to improve as well. And I got to sort of revise it 2 times each day, which was nice. Yeah, I enjoyed my practicum, and I almost felt like I was sad that it got cut short. I didn't necessarily want to leave, but I guess that's just how it goes. Um, yeah, I remember on the very first lesson I taught, I was pretty nervous. Um, I saw my associate teacher teach the lesson first thing in the morning, and I wasn't expecting to teach this lesson, but another teacher came into the class and said, "Hey, you want a spare?" Because I guess she had taken over for him one day, and so he was giving back the spare period. And then she said, "Yeah, Adam, do you want to teach?" And I was like,
Nice.
"Yeah, okay, yeah, okay." So I basically kind of wung it based on what I saw her do first thing in the morning. So that was probably the most nerve-wracking thing that happened to me in my practice.
Yeah,
But
no,
it was good
that's
though.
that's wonderful. Yeah, that's definitely a good teaching experience. I don't think that there's anything so helpful as just being thrown into the fire. Um, like I think you learn the most from that. And I do think you touched on something pretty big there. I think that in your first practicum, when you're sort of sitting there with your mentor teacher, you're very much focused on their behavior and you're focused on how to teach, right? Like, what type of teacher do I want to be? What type of language do I want to be using with students? How do I want to be, teaching my lesson? What tools am I using, etc. And I do think that in future practicums, you are sort of going to have the opportunity to learn more about classroom management, and like responding to students and managing their behavior in the classroom. And I do think that's something that comes in later practicums. Unfortunately, in my case, my school-based practicum was canceled because York, being in Toronto, had its fair share of crisis this year, to put it mildly, as things have been shut down for pretty much the whole time that I've been in Teachers College in the Greater Toronto area. But we were able to get an online community practicum. And in that practicum, I was paired with a partner organization called Youth Empowering Parents. And what I did was, in my first term there, actually before that, I will explain really quickly. Instead of having block placements at York, generally like every Wednesday you would have a school placement, and then every Thursday you would have a community placement throughout the whole year in your first year. So there isn't a block placement. So it's a little bit different in that sense. But yeah, with my community organization on Thursdays throughout the first term, I would meet with some parents. So I'd meet with my mother, my mother-in-law, my father-in-law, and and a couple other community members. And we would go over what skills they want to learn, and that pretty much was me teaching financial literacy skills and sort of tech skills to complement that. So, doing budgets and using Excel, online banking, how to use functions in Excel, and so on. And that was a great learning experience. I quite enjoyed that, but it was nice to sort of be dealing with people who already sort of have that sense of self, and they already know what they're good at and what they're not. And I think that really does relate to high school a little bit better, as I noticed a lot of my peers got community organizations that were working with PJ students when they're teaching IS. So I'm thankful that it's a little bit relevant. And then in my second term, I was working with that group of parents still, but also working with a group of grade 5 leadership students, where we sort of went through different tech skills and different ways to be involved in student governance and student leadership within the school, and sort of honing their skills there and acting as a mentor. So yeah, that was sort of my experience in practicums. And I think that all of us, I think we all had a good time in practicums, and I think that's really where those are the most important parts of the program. That's where you're going to be getting your references. That's where you're going to be learning how to teach and what type of teacher you are. And I don't think that, the in-class learnings can ever replace that. So I'm definitely glad that all of our schools, we get the opportunity to have a lot of placement. And I'm excited for it in second year when I get all of my school placements. I guess in terms of returning back to the programs that we were in, were there any classes that particularly stood out to you this year? Yeah.
For me, I think my favorite one was assessment and evaluation of learning. Again, just because I never really had seen it from the teacher perspective. I'd always obviously been a student receiving the evaluation. So it was cool to kind of see the thought process behind what makes a good assessment and evaluation and the difference between assessment and evaluation. But as well, the prof for this course was what really made it awesome. I submitted an assignment, and a couple days later, she was like, Jess, you did this assignment all wrong. Would you like to resubmit it? And I was just shocked by the generosity, because I feel like in my undergrad, my professor probably would have given me a 10% and moved on. Whereas I kind of mentioned this earlier, these profs really want you to learn. And so being given the opportunity to redo the assignment actually made me learn and realize what I did wrong, what it would take to do a correct assignment. But yeah, that course was totally invaluable, definitely applicable to every single course and every single subject I'm going to teach in my teaching career, whereas some are obviously more tailored to how to teach gym, how to teach art, whereas this course is applicable to any other subject I'm going to teach, and it's something I'll always be able to use throughout my teaching career. So yeah, that was my favorite course, but mostly because of the professor.
Yeah, I think the teacher can make the course sometimes, which is maybe a good thing to believe given that we're going to be teachers. But I don't know if I had one favorite course. one that I really liked was called creative support or creating supportive learning environments. And we talked a lot about things that I hadn't necessarily thought a ton about or didn't necessarily have a lot of insight into beforehand. Like um, talked about students living in poverty, talked about indigenous students. We talked about um, just a whole bunch of different sort of issues students might have that you never would think of. Um, and our teacher, he was a he started out as a school teacher, and then he moved up to being a principal and moved up to being a superintendent. So he had a lot of insight into the sort of the roles at the different levels. Um, and the focus was really just on getting to know students as individuals as opposed to well, just that really over anything else is just forming relationships with students. And I think I agree that that's probably the most valuable thing, because ultimately you're just developing people like for the future. You're not trying to develop robots, like making making future citizens. So I like that about that course.
Yeah, no, that's great. Um, I'm actually surprised by like a couple of the courses that you guys had the opportunity to take. Like Jess, was your education or sorry, your evaluation and assessment course, was that mandatory?
Yep. It was in winter term. We all had to do it.
Okay,
At
interesting.
least for
Yeah.
primary junior. I'm not sure for intermediate, senior, or junior intermediate, it would be different. But for primary junior, we had our full course load selected for fall and winter term.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. Just because like assessment for us is a an elective, which I think sort of counterintuitive because it's such an important piece to teaching. Um, so I'm a little bit surprised that it was an
Surprised, yeah.
elective. Yeah, but also I
Yeah,
think
for us
something.
that's a second year course.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off,
No, 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 it's
but it's
okay.
not an elective for us either.
Okay, yeah, that's so interesting that different universities are sort of dealing with that differently. And I think something you said as well, Adam, sort of struck me because you were sort of talking about how your professor there had experience in sort of the education industry as a teacher, as a principal, and as a superintendent. And I found at York, I think that might be the case with our PJ program. There's a lot of educators there, but once we get into the IS, pretty much all of our professors are academics. They don't really have relevant teaching experience to what we're going to be doing. So I think the courses, like the value of those courses are just a little bit different because they were very much about like theories of learning and theories of like philosophy. So yeah, I do find that interesting, and I think in my case, my favorite courses were the ones relating to inclusion and diversity. And I know that's sort of a cheat answer giving a couple of courses, but basically inclusion was like part one and diversity was part two. And I found just those to be the most practical courses, developing IEPs, how to work with students, how to make our pedagogy culturally relevant and responsive, how to work with intercity students in the GTA. And I found those courses just to be the most informative, pretty much because they were the most practical. And they were actually, I think that was the only prof that I've had, or maybe I had one more that was actually a teacher before. And I did find that that made a massive difference. So I think, like, yeah, getting taught by teachers is sort of important to being a teacher. Um, and then I guess we're going to come into the last question here because I think we've been talking for about 30, 40 minutes right now. So would you recommend your university's Teachers College to anyone who's interested in applying? And what advice would you give to students thinking about applying to them?
So I'm only going to speak on the primary junior program because I'm not too sure about junior intermediate or intermediate senior. But at least for Nipissing primary junior, I would definitely recommend it. I've had an awesome experience so far with all my profs. I think they have all been primary junior educators, which Jeff kind of mentioned that it makes the course way more valuable. They have way more stories and are just way more relatable. It can kind of share that in-class perspective as opposed to here's something I learned that could be useful to you, whereas they're saying this is what I did in my classroom, this is what worked, this is what didn't. Um, so all of my profs have been great. I think I really enjoy the structure of the program as well. I enjoy having the block placements as well as for Nipissing, you can do your placement in any school board within Ontario. So that offers a bit more flexibility in terms of if you're attending Nipissing but want to teach somewhere else or live somewhere else in the future. And it also gives you an opportunity to try out multiple school boards too, if that is something that interests you. But in terms of advice, I would say keep an open mind. And don't be too hard on yourself, especially on placement. I think I have totally different advice for placement, but I'll stick to like being a student. But yeah, I would say keep an open mind. This is your first time learning all of this, so just take it easy. Try to absorb as much as you can and really utilize your profs. Understand that what they teach you is only like a 8 to 12 week course, and that something for that realm may go way beyond what they can teach in 8 to 12 weeks, as well as they're probably teaching it with their own personal bias. So again, if what they teach you doesn't vibe with you, there's probably another way about it, and someone else you can connect with to learn more about it, whether it's a specific subject or teaching style or classroom management strategy, etc. But yeah, utilize your profs as much as possible. They all have invaluable experience, a lot of experience, at least at Nipissing Primary Junior. But yeah, I love the program. Again, if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach out to me on my Instagram or my YouTube channel. I am more than happy to help, and I love when people reach out to me on my Instagram. So don't be afraid to do that. And yeah, that was my experience so far.
I think for me, I would absolutely recommend Western. I think so they I don't know if Nipissing or York use this, but Western switched to a pass-fail design. Just I think it was just this year, and I was sort of skeptical about that at the beginning. Like I thought, oh, grades might be better because you get a better idea of where you're at. But after they sort of talked to us about it, I kind of agreed that the main focus should be on just developing yourself as a professional. So the way that it was structured was we were allowed to submit an assignment, get feedback, and resubmit the assignment, taking into account the feedback. And I think it did put more of an emphasis on just noticing where you can improve and then improving those areas. And then it actually gives you the chance to do so, as opposed to saying wait till the next assignment to improve on these things. Sorry, I'm a little cold.
No, it's all right. It's all right.
But yeah, and I liked the instructors. I thought they were great. But like I said, I think they all had their own sort of accomplishments and a lot of experience in teaching, and well-formed opinions, but still like different opinions, diverse. And what was the other part of the question? I think there was something else.
What advice would you give to students applying?
What advice? Right. I think to go in with something, like go in with a goal. I think so for me, like I had some things that I wanted to work toward changing in the education system. So I wanted to make learning a little bit more engaging for students, and I wanted to so I worked on creating little activities that try to make the classroom sort of just more fun and interactive, and promote a little bit more social interaction between students as well. And at our school in particular, they allowed us a little bit of freedom in our assignments. Like some of them were a little bit open-ended, and I found that for some people would say I don't like the open-endedness. I need a little bit of direction. But for me, given that I had a little bit of a goal, I was able to complete these open-ended assignments like in a snap of the fingers, because it was like, oh, I want to do this. Like I want to just create a first day lesson plan to sort of set the tone. So I'll just do that because this assignment gives me a little bit of freedom to do that. And yeah, so going in with a bit of a goal and some ideas about what you want to do as a teacher will help you. It'll actually probably make things easier for you.
Yeah. No, I think that's great advice. And I think where I'm going to come from here is would I recommend York University? And I would say yes, but I am going to put a couple of caveats on that because I do think that both of you touched on some points that I think do make different programs more valuable for different people. So for example, at York in the IS program, pretty much the lectures that we have, again, are academic, so you're not really getting that practical teaching component. And when you do get someone who's been a teacher before, they're PJ. So there's a lot of PJ experience, and I have a lot of friends in the PJ program, and they absolutely love it. But sometimes in IS, when we are, wanting to deal with sort of grade 8 to grade 12 students, with most of us trying to focus on grade 11 and grade 12 students, having assignments and lectures that are based towards teaching and assessing and sort of building lessons for kindergarten, grade 1 and grade 2 students, it's not that it's not helpful. I think that there's just some very distinct differences. So I will put that caveat on it. And also I think Jess touched on something with Nipissing being able to work in any school board, and off camera I believe, Adam, you said that it was the same way with Western, where you could work in any school board for your practicums. And that's not the case for York. So York has a very small selection of school boards that you can work in. Pretty much you can work in Peel, you can work in the Toronto District School Board, or you can work in the York Region School Board. So pretty much that spans the area from Mississauga to Scarborough, and then going north, it's up until Newmarket. So it's a fairly small area, so you don't have the opportunity of really changing school boards in your practicum, or, just getting experiences with different school boards, which can be very useful when you're trying to figure out where you want to work and what school boards align with your values, because some school boards are very different than others. But no, I would say that York has been a great university and they have a great program, but I do think that different programs are good for different people. So, if you're someone who wants to test out different school boards, maybe York isn't the option for you. And, if you live in the Toronto area, UOIT, or it's actually not, it's no longer UOIT, it's now Ontario's Technology University or something like that, OTU, I want to say. They have the option to apply to any school boards to work your practicum there. In terms of my advice, I would say try to find ways to get involved with, try to get some form of teaching experience before you actually go to teachers college, and whether that is helping out as an educational assistant in your summers, in the school boards that you want to work in, or in the grades that you want to work in would be great. I know with Jess and I, we were both involved in residence life at the university, so I would suggest that. And then also, if you have the opportunity of TAing while in university, I would definitely look into that, just to give you some experience responding to students and assessing them and marking them, and just overall getting teaching experience. It's never a bad thing. But yeah, I think we're going to end the podcast there, everyone. So thank you so much for joining me today. I hope the two of you have a great day, and I hope anyone who's watching has a great day. If you like this content and want to see more of the podcast, please like and subscribe to the channel. It does go a long way in helping all of us out. And also, if you like these two and you like their stories and want to hear more from them, go and check out their YouTube channels. They're absolutely great, so I would highly recommend it. So with that said, everyone, have a great day and see you next time. Bye!